Welcome to FDA Imports, cross-border compliance with attorney Benjamin L. England.
Welcome to FDA Imports, cross-border compliance with attorney Benjamin L. England. Ben is the founder of FDAImports.com, where he helps businesses navigate the often confusing world of FDA regulations and international trade compliance. I'm your host, Heidi Mack, and today we're unpacking the world of private labeling and contract manufacturing. This is Private Label Pitfalls, Customs, and FDA Risks You Didn't See Coming. Thank you again for joining us, Ben. Welcome back.
Hi, thanks, Heidi. Good to see you.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, let's get to it. Ben, what does private labeling look like in the FDA-regulated import world?
So private labeling is actually sort of all the rage. This has been the case for quite some time, but with the internet explosion and the advance of international trade generally, it's much more frequent that you have U.S. Companies that sell things that they don't make, but it's under their own name, right? I mean, think about it. How many things how many companies are out there that are largely virtual companies? They've got a brand, they've got marketing, they have an idea, and then they have someone else do all the work for them. Well, that is private labeling, right? You've got another manufacturer, and someone else is doing your manufacturing, someone else is doing your supply chain, logistics, someone else is doing your labeling. You're responsible primarily for the brand. You might be the importer, but you might not. You might have a third party that does the importation, who does the warehousing, who does your consumer complaints, right? They do everything. And all you are doing is licensing out the brand or the technology. So this kind of behavior is common in really most industries, and certainly in the FDA regulated space as well. You tend to find it only in sort of heavily marketed food categories, as opposed to say like traditional, say Whole Foods, right? I'm not saying Whole Foods like the store, but I mean like actual Whole Foods, right? So fish is going to be a whole food. A tomato is going to be a whole food. But when you get into more heavily marketed branded foods, and very often they're manufactured foods, that's where you will run into to a lot more of the private labeling scenario.
Got it. So then I know, again, you were giving us a lot there already. So like if I'm a US-based brand buying from a foreign manufacturer, who is legally responsible for the compliance then at the border?
So FDA regulation primarily focuses on the people doing the work. All right. So, for instance, a brand owner, if you're the brand owner and I'm the manufacturer and the distributor, you may or may not have to be registered with the Food and Drug Administration because you're not doing anything. FDA cares about who makes the product, who's marketing, who's labeling the product, who's storing the product, because those are the kinds of activities that represent risk with respect to the product. You as the brand owner might not do any of those things. So it could be that the FDA sort of doesn't care about you. Now you might be the importer, in which case you're importing from me in a foreign market. Then the FDA cares about you because now you're doing something. You're representing yourself as responsible for these goods as they come into the country, and you're taking on responsibility for compliance for those goods. So it really, FDA's jurisdiction really is targeted at the activity related to the goods. Who's the manufacturer? Who's the packer? Who's the physical distributor? The actual distributor? And they care less about necessarily whose name is on the label. One place where that doesn't apply though is has to do with the name of the manufacturer, packer, or distributor that's on the label itself, right? So one of those three has to be on the label. So if you're the distributor and you're the brand owner, it might say Heidi Mack Incorporated with your address. It'll say manufactured for Heidi, right? And so now when that happens, if there's a consumer complaint, if there's some sort of problem with respect to the product, the government's probably calling you. The reason is because the consumer is probably going to call you because they can't see me because you're private label distributor and I'm the manufacturer. I'm not on the label. So you can take on liabilities even though you're not doing anything with the product itself.
Got it. So then, what are the most common documentation or registration problems you see then in these private label relationships?
A lot of countries have registration requirements that go to the product itself. The product is registered in, say, Mexico. The product is registered in Canada. The FDA, there are some instances where there are what are called product listings, but the registration is actually about facilities. It's who does things that FDA cares about. What they want to find out is who are they going to inspect, right? Because they want to inspect the person making it. They want to inspect the person who's packing it or who's labeling it. And you're not those people if all you are is a private label distributor. Ordinarily the agency is going to the registration requirements are going to go to those people who are doing those kinds of activities and not the private label distributor. Now, in some products, and I'm going to use drugs as a classic example, there are things in the regulation they're called private label distributors. So that's sort of what we're talking about. And those instances, you would have, if you look at an over-the-counter drug or even a prescription drug, you look at the label. There's numbers in the upper right-hand corner. They're called the National Drug Code, the NDC. The first five numbers belong to the labeler. And so if you're a private label distributor, those first five numbers are your numbers, not mine. Now you've taken on certain regulatory obligations with respect to that product because you're the labeler, and FDA is going to require information about you. In the registration space, it's really mostly about FDA cares about who's doing the stuff with the product that could cause problems with people's health or people's safety. And that's usually the manufacturer, the packer, or people who are distributing product in a cold chain or something like that. Is it staying cold enough? That kind of thing.
So then, in these cases, have you seen where a buyer got into trouble because the manufacturer changed a formula or label without telling them?
Yeah, certainly. And it could be the kind of thing that slips by the buyer, like they don't realize it. And now those kinds of problems you'll see more in like a food label or in a cosmetic label, and it's because FDA has less oversight with respect to the labeling. I mean, they have jurisdiction over cosmetic and food labeling, but there isn't a pre-marketing step where you present that information to the Food and Drug Administration. With over-the-counter drugs, for instance, you have to do the drug listing, and that's where you get the NDC number I mentioned. And when you do that, you give the label to the FDA, and FDA is actually seeing it before it goes into the market. They don't approve it usually, but they see it. So in that industry, you don't have the problem because the manufacturers know that if they change the label, they have to get a new NDC, and they don't want to do that. But it can happen where a manufacturer changes the formulation. They may change a functional ingredient, like they may use a different, flowing agent or a different, component that's performing a function in the manufacturing process, and not tell you, and then they change the label, or they fail to change the label. It could be they change the formulation and they forget to change the label. So we see those, and FDA catches it usually by sampling and by testing and evaluating those products. It's easy to overlook, and it could be a big problem for importers who are relying on the third-party manufacturers to do it right, and they're not observing what they're doing.
So then, say if your shipment then does get detained, what happens if the brand owner isn't listed as the importer?
Good question. Nothing happens in particular. It's just that the brand owner is going to have less control over what's happening at the border. When you import something that's under FDA jurisdiction, the only people FDA will really talk to will be the importer or the owner or the consignee, which is the person the goods are going to, right? So you could be the importer and I'm the consignee. And then somebody else could be the owner. You have three different people that play these roles. FDA will talk to any of those three people, but not anybody else. So it could be that the brand owner doesn't own the goods, isn't importing the goods, and is not receiving the goods. In those circumstances, the brand owner, even though they have a real potential risk if there's a problem, because it's their name that's on the product, it's going to it gets the press. they may not be able to have a lot of say in what the FDA is doing at the border, and it could put them sort of at the mercy of these other parties who are talking to the government about their product. So I usually will tell my clients, if they're going to be the brand owner, you want to be one of those parties because you want to be the one that's talking to the government when the goods get here. You don't want somebody else talking to the government on your behalf. Foreign manufacturers have this problem too, because foreign manufacturers, unless they own the goods when they get here, they're not one of those free players either. So they have that problem as well, right? Where the importer, if FDA has a problem with a product, and if the importer is looking at, either I'm going to take the hit, as the importer, or the manufacturer's going to take the hit. The manufacturer's going under the bus. That's what's happening, right? And so you don't want that to happen as a brand owner or a manufacturer.
Then how can a private labeler make sure their labels and formulations meet FDA requirements when they don't control the factory?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, you do that primarily through the contract that you arrange with the foreign manufacturer. You need to have the authority to audit their facilities, to audit the formulation, to have third parties come in and evaluate what's happening in the facility. And of course, you're going to have pre-approval of the labels and those kinds of things. So you're going to build that into the commercial relationship because you really can't control it any other way. And you also are going to want to make certain that that if there's a problem, that you've got the ability built into the contract to sort of recoup losses with respect to individual cargo, individual shipments that come in where there's a problem. But you have to do that really commercially. There's no one's going to do it for you. The FDA is not going to do it for you. Customs won't do it for you. It's something you have to control mostly through your contract.
Got it. You were talking about contract language. Is there anything like super specific that you can think of, like in the contract language or due diligence, in order to protect themselves legally?
Well, as I mentioned, you don't want clauses in there that give you the authority to do inspections or to require third-party inspectors to come in. Of course, I would pay for it as the brand owner. But you, if you're the contract manufacturer, would have to agree to allow my inspectors to come in and evaluate what's going on. So those are one thing you do. The other thing you're going to put in there is that if it turns out there's going to be indemnification clauses. Like if you do something as a contract manufacturer that ends up becoming a problem at the U.S. border, then you're going to indemnify me in terms of the cost. Now, one thing that I caution people about a lot is they'll say, look, I have a contract manufacturer, I'll just make them responsible for everything. And that won't work. When you're importing product into the United States, you are responsible to the federal government. If I bring something in that you made for me and I have an indemnification clause that says you'll indemnify me for damages if you do something wrong that causes money, right? And Customs seizing my cargo because the FDA says it's a problem, that's going to cost me money. And so that what I cannot do is I cannot go to Customs and FDA and say, wait a minute, I have an indemnification clause with Heidi, and Heidi's responsible for this. They'll say, no, you're the importer. You can't, nobody's going to indemnify you from us, right? We're the government, and we regulate you. So there's some things you cannot indemnify. You can't shift the risk. Now, if it's expensive, I can make you pay for my fees, like my legal fees, right? Or replacement of the goods. That's a different kind of indemnification. That's cost of the goods. And that's the kind of thing that that you can get. I can get indemnification from you for. So having those, knowing what you can actually get coverage and help for from a third party is important to make sure you get those things right. You want to put the right responsibilities on the right people, and the contracts are the way you do that.
With all this, is this something that you specifically can help your clients structure up front, or does it usually happen where they come to you after there's already a problem?
Well, the purpose of a contract is to make it clear among parties what's going to happen when things go in the crap, right? I mean, that's the reason you have a contract. Like, you don't have a contract because you plan the relationship to go bad. You have a contract because it's possible that it will, right? And so the answer is that it's, if you don't have a contract, then the law is going to supply certain terms that would be considered to be ordinary commercial terms. So unless you dictate the terms in the contract, the law will do it for you. And it could do it in a way that you don't want it to. And that's the reason you need a contract. So it turns out that most international transactions are done through WhatsApp communications or email communications, and price is discussed. Terms like when the goods are supposed to arrive, what the quality ought to be, like some standards in terms of the quality, a description of the goods, but most people care about when do they got to pay and when do they get the goods, right? That's and so those terms tend to be pretty clear, right? And then they start engaging in a relationship business wise, and they start developing what's called a course of duty, right? They're a due course in terms of like the actual trading, the way they actually operate. Those kinds of operations can get incorporated into your agreement, even though you don't have them written. So it's surprising how many companies don't have really formal agreements. And then when things go in the crapper, they find out that they don't have the coverage that they wanted. And so it turns out most companies come to us after the fact. And it's because they just don't, look, we're friends, we don't need a contract, right? No, look, dude, the time you need a contract is when you're doing business with a friend, for God's sakes, right? Because you don't want it to be about you and your friend. You want it to be about two business people that happen to be friends, but we agreed in advance what we were going to do, right? And so now you can keep your friendship because you got it in writing. So that's you definitely need contracts. Far too often companies don't have them, and consequently, relationships fall apart and deals fall apart, and people have to pay for it. So
Yeah, well then, so friendships don't fall apart. Ben, what advice would you give a new US brand thinking of launching a private label product sourced overseas?
Well, you definitely want to find people that are doing it already. People who already have relationships and they've got experience in dealing with the regulated product. We're talking about FDA here primarily, and so I will stick with that. A cosmetic company that's already doing cosmetics in the United States, and they're in the business of doing contract manufacturing. So you want somebody who's got experience in dealing with the U.S. government. They've been inspected before. They've got the registrations already. They've got familiarity with what's going on. Now, you might pay more for that, but the cost of not having somebody with experience could be substantially higher than paying for somebody who's got experience. You definitely want to make certain that they understand the importance of being able to evaluate whether or not what's going on in the facility is what you expect, and that they not be worried about that. That be sort of a normal thing for them as well. So it's research. And it's identifying people that are in those spaces, and they're available. The other thing you would do is FDA has these things called import alerts. We talked about it in another episode. Those are public. Make certain that the people you're talking to aren't on import alert, because that's a completely different problem. It's a public document. At least you go look for that, right? So do some basic due diligence about the history of the company, whether they've had any problems with the FDA before, whether they're familiar with the product already and the kinds of regulatory issues that exist. And those things will go a long way in terms of selecting the right contract manufacturer.
Well, thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. So today, private labeling can be a great business model, but only if you get the compliance side right. For help reviewing supplier contracts, import documents, or FDA strategy, reach out to Ben at FDAImports.com. And if you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review and share it with someone navigating the same path. Thank you again for joining us, Ben. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Heidi. Good to see you.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.